Hello, this is Jane, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 4 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the first article is on the front page, and it is under the byline of Federal Politics, Ottawa Orders Review of Ruling on Streaming Giants. CRTC sought 15% fund charge amid legal challenges, and this is by Reza Patel. Ottawa. The Liberal government is directing Canada's broadcasting regulator to revisit a decision compelling foreign streaming giants to pay more to support Canadian content, offering up a potential concession on a long-standing trade irritant with the United States. Instead, Ottawa will send $600 million to immediately stabilize Canada's audio and audiovisual sectors, Culture Minister Mark Miller announced Wednesday. The reality is the sector is one that's has been suffering for years. We introduced Bill C-11, as you recall, to make sure that people were paying their fair share. Since then, there's been litigations that have frozen funds that are intended to support the sector and haven't. And today, we're impatient to make sure that that gets out, Miller told reporters. We don't agree entirely with the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications decision. I will be directing the CRTC to review that decision, and from now until then, we'll be actually assuming that role and making sure that people actually get the money they've been asking for. Miller was referring to the Online Streaming Act, a contentious Trudeau-era law that sought to subject streaming titans like Netflix and Disney Plus to the same regulations that already apply to traditional television and radio broadcasters in Canada. That meant streaming services like broadcasters would have to contribute to the funding, production, and promotion of Canadian content under a regime overseen by the CRTC. The law was opposed by streaming platforms at the time and by U.S. trade groups that felt the legislation unfairly discriminated against American companies. The CRTC, in its efforts to implement the act, revealed last month that major online streamers would have to pony up 15% of their Canadian revenues to support the creation of Canadian film and television. The figure is triple what the CRTC initially announced in 2024, an amount that has faced legal challenges from companies like Amazon, Apple, and Spotify. Asked Wednesday whether the Liberals' decision was tied to U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to impose additional tariffs on Canada and other countries following an investigation into forced labor in supply chains, Miller acknowledged the policy was a source of friction. It's no secret to anyone that's been paying any attention to this that the United States Trade Representative has identified these issues as a trade issue. It would be disingenuous to suggest that this is a single issue, Miller said. Both Miller and Prime Minister Mark Carney refused Wednesday to frame the move as a concession to the Trump administration, with the Prime Minister telling reporters that his government's decision is another step to reinforce affordability for Canadians by ensuring costs aren't passed down to consumers. Last summer, the Carney government rescinded Canada's digital services tax, another controversial policy targeting big tech giants, including a number of American companies, to preserve trade negotiations with the U.S. U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra slammed the CRTC's new contribution rules in May, stating on social media that the decision was targeting and taxing U.S. companies, putting up new discriminatory trade barriers and worsening an investment climate for American businesses. The law has also drawn the ire of U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, with whom Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc met Tuesday. Greer signaled late last year that any successful review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement would be contingent on the resolution of a number of issues, including addressing the impact of the streaming law on U.S. companies. Last week, the Conservatives called on Carney's cabinet to reject the CRTC's contribution hike, in part because they feared Canadians would ultimately foot the bill. The government said in response that it did not have the power to directly intervene. Conservative MP Rachel Thomas, who led that charge, said the Liberals were finally admitting the Tories were right. Let's not ignore the larger issue at hand, and that is this. The Liberals all too often put regulations in place which drive up the costs for the consumer, and then, because of that added financial burden, they offer a subsidy, which again results in another tax, having to take money from the consumer once again. And on it goes, Thomas said. So until the government actually makes a decision to remove the regulatory burden to begin with, it will continue to impose that additional cost to Canadians. Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet, however, tore into Carney in the House of Commons, saying the Prime Minister was capitulating to the U.S. by sacrificing needed funding. Does the Prime Minister know that he's supposed to defend our culture and not barter it away? Blanchet said during question period. Carney said he was defending everyday Canadians and, by announcing the new funds, was maintaining investments in Canadian and Quebec culture. The next article is also from the front page under the byline of education. Parents shocked by school relocation plan that will displace special needs students. And this is by Maris Habibinia. Milena Jansen said she doesn't yet have the heart to tell her 16-year-old daughter, Anika, who has learning challenges, that she will be forced to transfer out of her special education school next year. Wednesday was prom night, Jansen said, and the news that Hayden Park Secondary School kids will soon be displaced for a few years to have a yet unknown school would have upset Anika. I'm so inflamed, Jansen said, a day after learning the Toronto District School Board plans to relocate kids at nearby Ord Street Public School to Hayden Park, which serves special needs girls, due to the construction of a 60-story tower right next to Ord's outdoor play area. It's heartbreaking and terrifying to imagine what the alternative is. And for a lot of these kids, Hayden Park is a lifeline, literally, said Jansen. It serves so many purposes. It's the only female identifying school, and for special needs. They're very vulnerable. There are kids that are suicidal that go here, and also girls that are on the spectrum, are highly sexualized. In a June 2nd letter sent by Jennifer Chan, the TDSB's Superintendent of Education, parents, and caregivers were notified that the students at Ord will be moved to Hayden Park, both in the Grange Park neighborhood downtown, just 700 meters apart, as early as January 2027. However, it would displace about 130 kids at Hayden Park, an overwhelming majority of whom have special needs ranging from autism to various learning disabilities. Excessive vibration, traffic, air quality levels, noise, and the risk of falling objects due to construction are not conducive to a safe learning environment for students and staff, Chan's letter said. Given the number of Ord Street students, we need to relocate Hayden Park School to another TDSB site as it represents the best opportunity to accommodate Ord Street School during construction. Dave Pescar, a student whose 2 daughters attend Ord, said he knew in April their kids would have to relocate, but they didn't know Hayden Park was even an option until an emergency meeting Tuesday night after Chan's letter went out. We're all worried. We have suspicions it will be a domino effect, Pescar said, referencing concerns Hayden Park students will be permanently displaced, and so will Ord students, because the latter will be taken over either by the city or province for other development purposes. Hayden Park is probably the best possible outcome in terms of proximity and keeping the school together, but on the other hand, why does a public school have to close because they have to build a building? According to a bulletin that Ord School's principal sent parents Wednesday afternoon, the TDSB is anticipating the relocation period will be 3 to 4 years, or until tower construction is complete. The bulletin said Hayden Park will also be renovated to accommodate the needs for an elementary school, and that Ord Daycare will be relocated to Contact Alternative School. On Wednesday evening, TDSB spokesperson Ryan Bird told the Star that Hayden Park was the best option because it's close by and has room for all 400 Ord students. Of note, Hayden Park SS doesn't have a geographical boundary and accepts students from across the city, he said, adding the board wanted to keep Hayden Park students together. Parents at Hayden Park say they haven't been consulted and remain in the dark about some questions. They argue the move doesn't consider students' learning needs and highlights an extreme lack of transparency. Why us? Why can't they send the elementary school to a safer place that is empty? Said Kamala Kalsi, co-chair of the Parent School Council for Hayden Park, in an interview. They're moving the most vulnerable population to God knows which location, and for these students to even transition from one class to another is a big issue. Kalsi said the TDSB has scheduled a meeting on June 17 with parents to let them know where Hayden Park students will be relocated. Chan's letter did not detail how the TDSB chose Hayden Park as the host school, aside from a thorough review of all possible options and sites. I recognize that Hayden Park SS is a close-knit community with strong connections to its current home, and we will do everything possible to make this as smooth a transition as possible, Chan's letter continued. Kalsi said she doubts that Hayden Park students will be coming back and believes this is a way to permanently transfer students. They just want to close Hayden Park and access to the special needs program, she said. Deborah Williams, the local school board trustee, said given that the TDSB will be suspending enrollment this fall for grade 9 and 10 students at Hayden Park, citing low registration numbers and parents brewing concerns for the last few years about the school potentially closing, that this looks like the board and province's way of winding down the school. Everything's happening behind closed doors, Williams said. The usual process for these reviews involves extensive meetings and opportunities for feedback. I don't know why TDSB chose Hayden Park, aside from proximity. Williams said the province, which has been running the TDSB through a supervisor, is primarily to blame because it has been sending a message that boards have to fit students into a funding formula that doesn't serve our students' needs. Jansen and Hayden Park has a model of special education for girls that has been successful, which is uncommon. It really does feel that they aren't taking into account the genuinely unique situation here, she said. And I need to pause here for a moment to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the last article from the front page is under Courts, Couple Guilty in Neighbor Killing. Filmmaker Riaz Habib was found dead in 2023 after barbecue dispute. This article is by Jacques Gallant. As police investigated the mysterious death of Riaz Habib, whose body was found in the trash compactor of his Liberty Village townhouse complex, his neighbor, Koa Tran, said to another, "You don't think the police think I did it, do you?" Not only did the police think he did it, but now a jury has said so as well. Tran, 36, was convicted of second-degree murder on Wednesday in the 2023 death of the 53-year-old filmmaker who lived above Tran and his wife, 30-year-old Isabel Nagayan. Nagayan, who helped Tran dispose of the body in the garbage compactor wrapped in a blanket, towels, and duct tape, was convicted of accessory after the fact and committing an indignity to a body. Handwritten notes left next to the body read, "Can someone lift this into the trash? Very heavy. And please do not open. Lots of sharp metal and glass inside from renovation. Don't worry, we wrapped it in fabric." It was all over a dispute about barbecuing. Crown attorneys Anna T. Tenhouse and Nathaniel Smith contended Habib had been complaining about the smell and smoke from Tran's balcony barbecue, and prosecutors argued tension had been building in the weeks leading up to his death. Following the verdicts, Superior Court Justice Kenneth Campbell revoked bail for Tran and Nagayan, highlighting the seriousness of their crimes. Poor Mr. Habib was killed and his body thrown in a dumpster, the judge said. The Crown suggested Tran snuck into Habib's unit in the middle of the night, perhaps using a copy of a key he had been provided a few years earlier, though Tran denied he had one. Tenhouse argued he surprised Habib as he slept and chased him down the stairs in his unit before beating him to death. Neighbors testified at the trial, recounting hearing a man's repeated pleas for help. At least one called 911, but was put on hold, while others chose to go back to bed. Neighbor Vincent Ching, who used to work with Tran, recounted the odd phone call where Tran asked him about the police's possible suspicions. Ching also testified that Tran told him he had seen a pimp and a crack whore going in and out of Habib's unit the night of the noises. Lynn Hua, the couple's neighbor, testified as the Crown's star witness. After being awoken by the noises upstairs, Hua said Nagayan told her that it was probably just Habib filming. Later, the couple told her to keep quiet if questioned by police, Hua testified. While there was no surveillance footage of the fatal incident or of the body being moved, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, and no cause of death, the couple's DNA was found on the material covering Habib, and Tran's fingerprints were found on the handwritten notes. Tran himself denied being in Habib's unit on June 6, 2023, maintaining he was sleeping alone in his living room while Nagayan shared their bedroom with Hua, who was also Nagayan's best friend. Tran would go off in tangents during his testimony and had to be frequently reminded by his lawyer, Liam O'Connor, to get back to the topic at hand. During cross-examination by Tenhouse, the accused man was combative. It's apparent that Koa Tran has an interesting personality, O'Connor told the jury in his closing arguments. As my grandmother might have said, well, he's not my cup of tea. But he doesn't appear to be a bad person. The only thing Tran would admit to was throwing out the dead man's bicycle on June 8, 2023, as captured on surveillance footage. He testified he didn't know that Habib was dead and that it was an act of revenge for a heated conversation the pair had days earlier. Tenhouse argued he didn't just throw out the bike, but other possessions of Habib's as well, in an attempt to mislead police. Nagayan did not testify. Her lawyer, Tyler Smith, argued that perhaps her DNA ended up on the material covering Tran's body through cross-contamination. And he said the jury should have doubts about what Nagayan may have said to Hua, arguing the former roommate was dishonest and unreliable. The Crown has proven nothing more than suspicion and conjecture, Smith told the jury. She deserves to be acquitted. The pair will face a sentencing hearing in September. Next article is titled Go Trains Narrowly Avoided Collision in 2024. Report finds Transportation Safety Board has repeatedly called for fail-safes to prevent missed stop signals. And this is by Andy Takagi. 2 GO trains carrying a combined 400 passengers narrowly avoided a catastrophic collision near Burlington in 2024, a Transportation Safety Board report has found. On March 14, 2024, a GO Transit commuter train departed Aldershot GO Station in Burlington. The conductor and engineer in the front of the train were both preoccupied as they passed a stop signal. The conductor was focused on his tablet and the engineer was addressing an equipment issue in the cab, the report released Wednesday found. The train accidentally entered a track where another GO train was traveling in the opposite direction at nearly 87 kilometers per hour. Both trains were stopped, the report found, barely avoiding a head-on collision by 167 meters. In this occurrence, a catastrophic collision involving 400 passengers was narrowly averted, underscoring the need for physical, fail-safe train controls that can intervene when signal indications are not followed, said Yon Marrier, chair of the Transportation Safety Board, that's the TSB, the federal agency in charge of transportation-related investigations. Metrolink spokesperson Lindsay Miller said, following the 2024 incident, the Provincial Transit Agency and Alstom, the operator of GO Transit, have made moves to address human factors, procedural and systemic contributors identified in the Transport Safety Board's investigation report. Metrolinx and the Ministry of Transportation regularly review safety performance and incidents, while Metrolinx continues to meet all TSB reporting obligations and proactively share information with federal regulators, Miller said. We take the findings seriously, and both the Ministry and Metrolinx are currently reviewing the report, said Dakota Brasier, a spokesperson for Transportation Minister Prabmeet Sarkaria. In March, the Star reported that a GO train carrying 120 passengers was within seconds of derailing near Oakville this year due to a similar incident where a stop signal was passed according to an internal Metrolinx report. In that instance, on January 5, a westbound GO train just outside of the Oakville GO station blew through a stop signal and crossed over to a different track at about 112 kilometers per hour, when it should have only been traveling at about 24 kilometers per hour, despite the driver hitting the brakes. Since 2001, the TSB has called for fail-safes that guard against speeding and the subsequent derailments that often occur, but it has not been nationally mandated. The latest TSB report also noted irregularities with the GO train's internal recording system, which it says limited the information available to the investigator due to shoddy audio and bad camera angles. GO Transit currently doesn't have the safety systems that have become widespread in modern railway systems called positive train control that have been called for by the TSB. The TSB has, in the past, called for more regulatory oversight of the GO network, either by the Ministry of Transportation or another government body, as part of a 2023 report on a 2019 incident on Lancaster Street in Kitchener, where an adult and child were struck by a GO train. Wednesday's report repeated some of those calls, noting that the province has no overall regulatory framework for rail operations and has not issued any safety-related regulations pursuant to the Short Line Railways Act. The TSB has previously said it only investigates incidents on provincial railways at the request of the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. The next article is titled Teacher Talks Begin Under Dire Situation, and this is by Kristen Rashowi. Smaller class sizes, more special education resources, and addressing violence in schools are among the bargaining priorities for Ontario's teacher and support staff unions, who have filed a formal notice to start talks. Contracts expire at the end of August for all education unions representing public, Catholic, and French elementary and secondary teachers, as well as school support staff, and serving notices to bargain starts a 15-day deadline for talks to commence. The situation in Ontario is not just challenging, it is dire, said David Maston, president of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario, speaking at a press conference Wednesday alongside leaders from the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, l'Association des Enseignants et des Enseignants Franco-Ontariens, and CUPE's Ontario School Board Council of Union. The challenges bring us to the table have been building for years, and the consequences of inaction are becoming impossible to ignore, said Martha Haradawi, president of the Secondary Teachers Union. On Tuesday, at an unrelated announcement, Education Minister Paul Calandra told reporters he was quite optimistic about upcoming talks, but acknowledged there will be some tough negotiations. Emma Testani, Calandra's press secretary, said Wednesday, "We remain optimistic that all sides can work together in good faith toward fair and responsible agreements that support students, families, educators, and taxpayers." While there will be important discussions ahead, all parties shared the same goal of keeping students in the classroom, maintaining stability in our schools, and supporting strong student outcomes across the province, she said. In the last round of talks, teacher unions agreed to binding arbitration to settle big items like salary increases while avoiding strikes. However, the 2022 negotiations with the support staff union were fraught, with the government passing legislation preemptively banning strikes using the Charter's notwithstanding clause and imposing a contract, prompting a 2-day walkout. The province later repealed the bill, and a tentative agreement was eventually reached. In this round of talks, Maston has said his members want class caps of 26 in kindergarten and 24 in grades 4 to 8, as well as a boost to funding for special needs students. The unions say improvements to pay will also figure prominently as they continue to urge the government to address teacher recruitment and retention. Haradawi said skilled trades teachers are particularly needed, given the government's focus, but often make more on the job site than in the classroom. The issue of class complexity will also be up for discussion, which recognizes how many students with additional needs are in the classroom and the level of supports a teacher might require based on that. The complexity issues that we're dealing with are making our jobs incredibly difficult, Maston said. The supports are not there. The resources are not there. Students are falling through the cracks. It's a topic that we've got to talk about and engage in a very serious and respectful way. In March, the 5 big education unions were rebuffed after asking the province for an early start to bargaining. Right now, all education workers are being stretched beyond their limits, said Joe Tagani, president of the School Boards Bargaining Council for CUPE, on Wednesday. Across Ontario, we are seeing inadequate staffing levels, growing violence in schools, increasing students' needs, and not enough supports for students with special education needs. And I need to pause once more to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is titled Toronto MPs Reluctant to Take a Stand on Ford's Plan for Billy Bishop Airport. Many are waiting for more details on controversial move. And this is by Mark Ramsey, Alex Ballingall, and Ryan Tamilty. Ontario. Many Toronto MPs are treading carefully around Premier Doug Ford's controversial plan to expand Billy Bishop Airport to allow jets, but some are expressing concerns about the exclusion of the city and potential impacts on the waterfront. After Ontario's takeover of Toronto's role in the airport, slammed as a, quote, land grab, unquote, by City Hall, critics have pressured the Carney government and the numerous Liberal MPs in the city to take a stance on the hot-button issue for which Ottawa has the final say. When the Star reached out this week to Toronto's 24 MPs, all but one of whom are Liberals, many argued there was no formal proposal before them to weigh in on just yet. But several criticized the provincial seizure of the city's role in operating the airport and insisted Torontonians need to be consulted properly. Others said they won't back a plan that hurts housing, green space, and other community infrastructure along the waterfront, highlighting the thorny political issue facing the Carney government. As the local member of Parliament, I will not accept any proposal that puts Little Norway Park, Bathurst Quaylands, and Toronto Islands, Lake Ontario, beaches, green space, schools, and community spaces at risk. Spadina Harbourfront MP Chi Nguyen said in a written statement declaring the airport redevelopment is not a hypothetical issue for her riding, where thousands of people have reached out about it. My position is straightforward. Protect the park, protect the islands, protect the beach and Lake Ontario, prove the economic case, and consult Toronto before any decisions are made. Of the 24 MPs, 7 Liberals, that's Gary Anand Desangari, Dali Begum, Sean Chen, Maggie Chi, Ali Asasi, Nate Erskine Smith, Ahmed Hussein, and the lone conservative Roman Baber did not respond to the Star's emailed queries or in-person requests for comment about the airport proposal. The Ford government has been eyeing an expansion of the island airport for months, claiming an expansion that would allow jets to land there would bring economic benefits to the province. With the backing of the Toronto Port Authority, which says the expansion could cost up to $5 billion, Ontario took over the city-owned portion of the land on which the airport sits, as well as its place in the tripartite agreement overseeing Billy Bishop. Any fantasy about the number of millions of travelers Ford expects to have is wrong, Don Valley West MP Rob Oliphant told the Star this week. Any expansion, it needs to be for safety, and the city needs to have control over the environment around it, Oliphant added. I'll be supporting an expansion of Pearson Airport over an expansion of Billy Bishop. Prime Minister Mark Carney has called Ford's plan a very interesting vision with big possibilities. Transport Minister Steve McKinnon, however, did not say where Ottawa was leaning when repeatedly asked this week. We have a new partner in the tripartite arrangement, McKinnon told reporters. When those arrangements are finalized, we'll sit down and talk about what they have in mind. Eglinton Lawrence MP Vince Gasparo said Wednesday that everything the province has done to date is 100% within its purview, but it will need to present an environmental plan and make a business case to get the federal government on board. I'm not going to light my hair on fire because someone posts something on Twitter, Gasparo told reporters. I want to see a concrete plan before I say I'm going to support it or not. Echoing that point, Davenport MP Julie Dzurowitz said details of Ford's plan are so far so scant as to be non-existent. Some Liberal MPs added their voices to criticism of the Ford government's approach, even as they avoided expressing strong opposition to the expansion. The provincial government under Ford often pushes things through quickly without consultation, said Michael Coteau, the MP for Scarborough-Woburn. Aya Khan, Parkdale High Park MP Karim Bardisi said the province's bill sends a message that Toronto's voices about the waterfront and the airport don't matter, and that has created some understandable concerns. And some drew red lines. In any consideration of its future, we should not accept, and I do not support, a reduction in affordable housing, green space, or community amenities at the waterfront or on the islands, said Toronto St. Paul's MP Leslie Church. The next article is titled Simon Fated as Term Ends. Outgoing Gigi spent career fighting for Indigenous rights. This is by Ryan Tamilty. Ottawa. Prime Minister Mark Carney praised Governor General Mary May Simon in her final days in office, not just for her work as Canada's vice-regal representative, but for a lifetime spent improving Canada's relationship with Indigenous people. Simon was celebrated Wednesday at a banquet hall just off Parliament Hill only days before her replacement, Louise Arbour, is to be sworn in. Simon entered on a red carpet with her husband, Whit Fraser, and Carney, flanked by Canadian flags and uniformed parliamentary security officers. The small reception was one of her last official acts as the King's representative in Canada. Long before she became Governor General, Simon was a negotiator representing the Inuit during talks that repatriated Canada's Constitution in 1982. Today, the rights of more than 1 million Indigenous peoples are protected in Canada's Constitution, in large part because of Mary Simon's leadership in the negotiations that entrenched Aboriginal treaty rights, Carney said. Simon also worked with national Inuit organizations and served as Canada's ambassador for circumpolar affairs, as well as Canada's ambassador to Denmark, where she helped establish the Arctic Council, an international body of northern nations. Carney said Simon had only continued that reconciliation work as Governor General, noting the meetings she helped arrange between King Charles and Indigenous leaders. A renewed relationship between Indigenous peoples and the Crown is taking shape because of Mary Simon's efforts to bring together His Majesty King Charles and national Indigenous leaders in historic meetings, he said. On July 26, 2021, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that Queen Elizabeth had approved Simon's appointment. Her successor, Arbour, met with King Charles on Wednesday ahead of her swearing in as Governor General on Monday. The government is providing $5 million to Simon's charity, Ajuin Nata, a mental health charity for northern communities. It has also pledged to match up to $10 million in donations made to the charity through the Rideau Hall Foundation. Ajuin Nata is an Inuktitut word, I apologize for my pronunciation, which means to persevere and was Simon's motto as Governor General. The government has traditionally helped outgoing governors general establish a charity when they leave office. Carney said Simon's choice shows her commitment to the North. True to the decades of service, true to herself, true to her character, Mary's silent service will not end with the last box leaving Rideau Hall. Your legacy will be long, will be deep, and it will endure not only in your accomplishments, in your service, but also in how you served, with determination, with compassion, with grace. Simon told the assembled audiences of senators, MPs, and parliamentary staff that her time in office had been marked by the COVID-19 pandemic, global uncertainty, and a change in prime ministers and a new U.S. president. One might say history has been keeping us gainfully employed, she said. Throughout these changes, I have remained confident in the strength of our democracy, our institutions, and our sovereignty. Simon spoke in French, English, and in Inuktitut during her speech. As she prepares to move out of Rideau Hall, she said her goal in the job was to bring Canadians together. As Governor General, I have sought to be a bridge builder between all Canadians. That is the true spirit of reconciliation. Before I read the next article, I just want to remind you that you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And the next article is titled, Ford Loses High-Profile Candidate. PCs seek replacement as city's former budget chief declines to run in Scarborough Southwest. And this is by Maura Welsh and Rob Ferguson. Premier Doug Ford's progressive conservatives are scrambling to find a candidate for the Scarborough Southwest by-election after their first choice declined. Gary Crawford, the City of Toronto's former budget chief, spoke to PC Party Executive Director Melanie Calandra Wednesday morning and told her that he would not be running as the Tory candidate despite earlier plans to do so. It was a lot of personal things, including aging parents, Crawford told the Star, as the reason for his decision. Both of his parents are in their 90s. That seemed to be the kicker. I just can't make the commitment that is needed to run in an election to the standard that I and the party expect. The political machinations in the Scarborough Southwest have been making headlines since last February when popular NDP MPP Dolly Begum resigned her seat to run successfully as a Liberal in the federal by-election to replace Bill Blair, who resigned to become Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Crawford said he soon got a call from Ford asking if he would consider running for the Tories in the by-election, which is expected this summer. It was an honor, that he thought of me, and I thought maybe I wasn't done yet, that I still had more I could contribute to my community and the province, he said. In an interview with the Star in April, Ford said he would work hard to win Scarborough Southwest. You know something, it will be a challenge, the Premier said, noting his Tories fell short in the 2018, 2022, and 2025 elections. When you win 3 large majorities and you lose that seat every single time, it'll be a challenge. But I say never say never. Pressed on whether Crawford, who lost to Liberal Andrea Hazel in the July 2023 Scarborough-Guildwood by-election, would run again for the Tories, he said, nothing's been official yet. In Tory circles, Crawford's candidacy had been widely expected. Crawford said his decision is still fresh, and while the PCs are probably not devastated, they were still counting on me. Shortly after Crawford told the party he was out of the running on Wednesday, Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy sidestepped a question on a Tory candidate during an announcement in Scarborough Southwest. That's the domain of the party and the Premier, so I'll let them speak on those matters, Bethlenfalvy told a reporter standing in a vacant lot near the Scarborough GO station, where he had just promised $178 million for the construction of 1,700 new rental homes, including 340, quote, affordable, unquote, units with below-market rents. And the next article is a Star exclusive. New study finds Muslim wage gap. Workers in the GTHA earn less and face higher unemployment rate, data suggests. And this is by Nicholas Keong. Muslim Canadians in the GTHA earn less and face greater unemployment and poverty compared to non-Muslims, despite higher education levels, gaps that a new report suggests are rooted in systemic racism and Islamophobia. Overall, 51% of Muslims in prime working age who are employed full-time hold post-secondary degrees compared to 40.5% among non-Muslims, according to the data extrapolated from the 2021 census. Yet, they had a median employment income of $61,000, $12,000 less than their non-Muslim counterparts. The aggregate annual income loss could amount to $1.2 billion a year, said the report, which offers a rare glimpse at the economic well-being of a religious minority in Canada. Muslim men had a median employment income of $68,000 compared to $78,000 for non-Muslim men. Muslim women had a median employment income of $54,000 compared to $67,000 for non-Muslim women. The data is part of the study released Thursday by the Islamophobia Research Hub at York University, which also included results from a survey of 423 Muslims in the region. The research was commissioned by the Office of the Special Representative on Combating Islamophobia in February. What we were really surprised about was the extent of what we've described as a Muslim wage gap that exists between Muslim and non-Muslim workers, said Salman Khan, a postdoctoral research fellow at York and lead author of the story. But then we also see it replicated when we disaggregate by visible minority status. The report, titled Working While Muslim, compared the household incomes between Muslims and non-Muslims in Arab, Black, East Asian, South Asian, West Asian, and Southeast Asian communities in the region. The income gaps persisted. The community accounted for 9.4% of the GTHA's population. While 10.2% of non-Muslims were unemployed, the jobless rate for Muslims reached 16.4%, with the unemployment rate for Muslim women at a staggering 21%. 17% of visible minority Muslims and 18% of white Muslims fell below the Statistics Canada low-income measure threshold, compared to 11% for visible minorities and 8% for white people in the non-Muslim population. We are obviously seeing a kind of Muslim effect on economic well-being, said Professor Nadia Hassan, director and founder of York's Islamophobia Research Hub. This is not a very healthy economic picture compared to what Muslims have to offer. Amira El-Hawabi, the former special representative on combating I got to get to the top of the article. Islamophobia, said the report suggested barriers faced by Muslim Canadians that aren't related to qualification or willingness to work. The data demonstrates this is not a newcomer issue and is impacting second-generation Muslims as well, said El-Hawabi. According to the report, 52% of Muslims surveyed did not feel their religious practices were adequately accommodated at work. 28% said their employers did not have work policies for requesting religious accommodation, and 28% reported fear of being judged or treated differently. More than half of the respondents said they felt isolated or excluded at work, while 26% said they experienced discrimination or prejudicial treatment while working. 1/5 of people reported having been asked about their religious identity and practices during job interviews. Of those, 25% said the questions were related to political beliefs, and 28% said they were asked about their ability to fit into the workplace culture. The report includes a plan for all levels of governments to address the issues and support the economic well-being of Muslim Canadians. It also urges Statistics Canada to include information on religious affiliation in its monthly labor force survey, as well as further research on a national scale. And the last article's World Cup may bring workplace flexibility. Ontario's incoming interim Treasury Board president says there will be, quote, flexibility, unquote, in work arrangements for public service employees during the FIFA World Cup. Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, who is taking on the Treasury Board role Friday, gave no details on what that flexibility would entail. However, and defended the province's return to office mandate, which has faced criticism from public service unions. Bethlenfalvy was tapped for the interim position last month after Carolyn Mulroney announced her resignation, which takes effect Friday. Mulroney previously said public service employees may be allowed to work remotely during daytime matches in Toronto, scheduled for June 12 and June 26. The Ontario Public Service Employees Union, which represents some 200,000 workers, says while it welcomes flexibility on work options during the tournament, that should be the approach at all times. The union's president, J.P. Hornick, says the best way for the government to approach work arrangements would be to discuss with employees what is needed for specific jobs rather than requiring all workers to be in office 5 days a week. Of course, flexible work arrangements need to exist in Ontario public service because they have existed since the pandemic, Hornick said Wednesday. So, we welcome the flexibility, but we also welcome the challenge to the return to office mandate. And I'm going to end with you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 4 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Jane. Thank you for listening.